Good evening, everyone. My name is Donovan Olvera. I am the Deputy Chief of Police for Field Services Bureau. Thank you all for attending tonight's town hall with Commander Greg Weber and his officers from the Northeast Area Command. In order to have an open dialogue, our officers must be honest and sincere to those questions asked of them. We look forward to the different topics discussed tonight. During our past town halls, we have received a lot of questions about crime. And although this is not what these town halls are focused on, we are planning a larger town hall in early June with Chief Medina to specifically talk about crime and address concerns you may have. Please check back on our Facebook page for details on that event. I will now introduce Pastor Walker, who will be moderating tonight's town hall event.
Thank you, Commander. Good evening. My name is Pastor David Walker. I am the Community Outreach Liaison Officer for the Albuquerque Police Department. I want to welcome you tonight to the fourth of 6 virtual town hall meetings within the 6 area commands of the Albuquerque Police Department. Tonight, we're with the Northeast Area Command, Commander Weber, Officer Saavedra, Freeland, Alvarez, and Pancho. These town halls is an opportunity for the minority members of the Albuquerque city to engage in discussion with each of the area commands to not only establish an effective and lasting partnerships in hopes of improving relationships between the Albuquerque Police Department and the African American community, but the purpose is also to develop strategies to reduce crime in the respective communities, as well as recruit minorities for the Albuquerque Police Department, the Police Service Aids Program, as well as the community policing councils. Before we get started, we have a representative from the Northeast Community Policing Council present with us tonight, Ms. Vicki Williams, and I want to give her a chance to share some information about the Northeast CPC. Welcome, Vicki.
Good evening, and Pastor Walker, thank you for this opportunity to speak a little bit about the community policing councils. As Pastor said, my name is Vicki Williams. I'm the chair of the Northeast Council, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about who we are, what we do. There are 6 community policing councils, 1 for each area command. We were basically born out of the CASA, and our main function is to provide or to build a bridge and build trust between the community and the Albuquerque Police Department. And we have 3 ways, I would say, that we do that. The first way, or the first tool that we have, is through recommendations. And what we do is we take recommendations from the community, from neighborhood association presidents and members, council members, community advocate groups, nonprofit organizations, and we make recommendations to change or improve operations at APD. Those recommendations are submitted to Kelly, who is our CPC liaison, and then he submits those to the proper subject matter expert. And we have a city ordinance that states that APD must respond to those recommendations within a 45-day period. The second way that we can influence change is to review current SOPs or standard operating procedures that are currently being trained and are enforced for all of the officers. We can review those policies and make recommendations to change those policies, or if we see a policy that does not exist or that may need to be deleted, we also have the opportunity to review those and make recommendations on policies. The third way that we have an influence on building that trust is through our monthly community meetings. We typically have speakers from all community members. Typically we have APD there to present crime reports and basically what is happening within the Northeast Area Command, statistics on crime numbers. And we have speakers, like I said, we had Raul Torres to come and talk, our current DA, just whatever is happening currently in Albuquerque, any current issues, any hot topics. We try to bring in speakers that will talk about basically what's happening in Albuquerque and with APD, also with what's going on with the monitors report and the CASA. Our meetings are the second Tuesday of every month. Currently, we are doing those via Zoom. Hopefully, the restrictions will be lifted soon and we'll be able to get back to having in-person meetings. We have those at North Domingo Baca Multi-Generational Center, and we will be continuing to present a hybrid. So we will have Zoom meetings, plus we will have in-person meetings. And we would invite the community to attend those meetings, and it is their opportunity to bring out issues that they are seeing within the Northeast Area Command specifically. The racers have been an issue that we've talked about at multiple meetings. And if there's anything specific that community members or business members that live or work within the Northeast Area Command have, that the meetings are their opportunity to come and present their issues. So again, I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the CPCs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you for sharing with us tonight. Now that you know something about the Northeast Area CPC, I hope you will make the decision to get involved in your area CCP so that you too can help make a difference. As we began tonight, I realize that many of you may have questions that you would like answered that I may not be asked tonight. So I want to ask that if you have any questions that you would please enter them into the chat room. We will do our very best to get to those questions. And if we're not able to, we ask that you please contact your area commander so that they'll be more than glad to answer your questions for you. More than 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the country operating at the federal, state, and local levels. We must understand that there is no typical police department. Still, evidence for racial disparities is growing. Those disparities doesn't seem to rise from the fact that Blacks and other people of color are more likely to commit crime, yet we're 4 times more likely to be stopped, handcuffed without arrest, pepper sprayed or pushed to the ground, and even killed by police officers stating that they feared for their life. Research points to patterns and explicit biases, which lets us know that we still have a lot to learn and a lot of unanswered questions. So tonight, to help build the trust in the Albuquerque Police Department in the community of Albuquerque, we come tonight with an uncomfortable to some conversation, to others realizing that it is truly a conversation that is in need of being had. And we're coming at the command of Chief Harold Medina for this town hall meeting to continue that dialogue. But we're also concerned for the safety of the community of the African-American residents and for all people of color who are disproportionate targets of police violence. To you officers tonight, we know that it may be uncomfortable, but we want you to know that this is in no way targeting you or implying that you may be a racist, or if there's racism within the department, we just ask that you be open and honest so that we can again build the trust that is lacking in the community and restore that trust that is faded away. So to help us understand what could be done to reduce and eliminate these implicit biases, instead of us talking just merely window dressing, we come tonight to put our talk into action. Commander, let me begin with you. Over the last several years, even decades, incidents like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, Eric Gardner, Rodney King, even closer to home, people like James Boyd. Viral videos of such incidents involving people of color has brought renewed attention to this issue of police brutality and racial profiling, which has caused and sparked a national conversation around police, race, and led to federal investigation enforcements in cities like Baltimore, Ferguson, and even here in Albuquerque. I shared with you several weeks ago and other officers a book, Policing the Police. Policing the Police is a book with firsthand knowledge and of the realities of policing in a city plagued by poverty and violence, where that relationship between the community and law enforcement had been badly fractured. So my first question to you tonight, looking at Albuquerque, how would you describe the relationship between the community and law enforcement? In our last couple of town hall meetings, one commander said the relationship was pretty good. Another one said it was like a roller coaster. It's rocky at times and then it smooths out at times. So looking at Albuquerque, how would you describe the relationship between the community and law enforcement?
Pastor, thank you very much for hosting the meeting.
Well,
Thank you for having us here tonight. And I think I would describe our relationship with the community as a positive one. I've attended community meetings in every area command that I've worked in. I've attended them as an officer, as a sergeant, as a lieutenant, and now as an area commander. And overwhelmingly, I feel the community supports the police department, and that they want, what I get asked more than anything is, how do we get more police officers into our neighborhood? Frequently, I have to deal with questions about, we're having an issue in our neighborhood. We called the police. It took you all 3 hours to get there. That is one of the most frequent comments or similar that I get. And I find myself having to try to explain call priority systems and short staffing and that kind of thing. And overwhelmingly, what I feel and what I have perceived since I've been in Albuquerque is that the citizens want the police, that when they call, they expect us to arrive. And so I feel like our relationship is a positive one. I think we've made a lot of effort to work with the community on solving issues.
okay.
And I would stress that I think that is the key to policing, is that law enforcement is not the answer to most ills of society. We are called to deal with laws that get broken and other situations that escalate, but we don't create most of those situations, and we work with community to find ways to solve those problems. And that's a process I enjoy. And I think that in Albuquerque, that our community does support the police department.
As a follow-up, you mentioned that it was a positive relationship. Would you be referring to the Northeast area only, or is the city in general?
I believe it's the city in general, Pastor. I spent the first 7 years of my career in the Southeast Area Command. I worked the Valley, I worked the Northwest. I've worked the foothills. I felt, and I've attended meetings in all of those locations. And, I would say that the relationship sometimes that the police have with the community can be contentious, because when your job is to tell people that, or to take enforcement action on something that somebody you're accusing them of breaking the law, it's almost never a completely positive experience, right? I mean, nobody likes to see the lights in their mirror when they get pulled over. It's almost by definition, it can be a contentious experience. But despite that, I think overwhelmingly my contact with the public and those that I've worked with has been positive.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your response. See, we have a sergeant in our midst tonight, Sergeant Saavedra. I want to ask you that same question. How long have you been on the force, first of all?
I've been on APD for 16 years.
16 years. In the 16 years that you've been an officer with the Albuquerque Police Department, how would you describe the relationship?
I would also say that it's positive. And the reason I can say that it's quite positive, Pastor, is because I deal with people every day. I go out there on the streets with my officers that are inside or that are in my squad. And as we have these interactions, like the commander said, they can be contentious because we're doing law enforcement action. But on the other end of that, people say, hey, thank you for being out here. Thank you for your service. And we're glad that you're here. And the question is, why did it take so long? And how do we get more officers?
Okay.
And those are, I believe when someone says that, why did it take so long? And how do we get more officers? That's positivity shining through.
Okay.
Because they feel better having police around
Right.
quicker, obviously the response being better, and also they want more police. No one's saying get rid of the police, defund the police. The people in the community are saying we want more police. We want to feel protected, and we want to feel good about living in Albuquerque.
Okay. You mentioned the word defund. That'll take me to my next issue tonight. Today in America, each and every day we read the newspaper. We turn on our computers, cell phones, you get to YouTube and Twitter, Facebook, and other media outlets. We read that somewhere across America, someone is calling for police departments to be defunded. How would that affect the Albuquerque Police Department if we defunded the police? I'm going to ask that question. Commander, why don't you answer first, and then I'll ask some of the other officers to respond.
I think all of these officers have their opinions on everything, and I'd be happy to hear them as well. You asked me how would it affect the Albuquerque Police Department. I think maybe a better question, not to reword your question, but is how does that affect the community? And so I don't believe it's a positive thing. I think that it's worth any community exploring options for how can we have the police focus in on crime and maybe less often on calls that some people would say are not appropriate for the police to respond to first. I'm open to that question, but I certainly don't want to live in a community where there are not police or there's substantially reduced police. I don't think that will have the effect maybe that some people believe that it would. I think they might see a different outcome than what they're expecting. And I do know that despite calls to defund the police in other areas, some of those places that we've read about have since called for additional funding upon seeing it fail.
Okay. Officer Freeland, I want to ask you that same question, knowing that defunding the police departments is not only taking funds, but it's moving it to other areas. What impact or how would defunding affect the police department in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion, it would not be good in general. You're going to take money away from the training. And I think Albuquerque Police Department particularly has a great academy, a great training system after the academy. I served on the police department back in 2008 through 13 as a police service aide. And even back then received incredible training as a police service aide before I became a law enforcement officer. And I think taking money away, well then first off, we're not going to volunteer to do this job. So if you decrease my pay, I'm not gonna show up to
You don't
work.
love this job that much that you would volunteer to be a police officer?
No, I'm not. I love my job. I do. I love serving the community. And what breaks my heart is that the community has to wait hours upon hours when they're a true victim of a crime for an officer to respond. And I think when you take funding away, then how are you gonna How are you going to hire people to join the police department? How are you going to incentivize us to stay when we're scrutinized over and over again? And I think, and then, funding when it comes to, gear, ammo, take-home vehicles, things like that. I think it's a ripple effect of how we respond, how we're able to do our job, and things like that. I work overtime, probably anywhere from 10 to 20 hours a week just for calls for service because we're shorthanded. So I think, which again, the whole money issue, yeah, it's great. It's overtime for me. But again, it's a direct effect that the community is seeing and they're not getting the response that they deserve.
Okay. Thank you. Officer Pancho, I want to back and ask you the same question that I asked the sergeant. Is there any chances for improvement in the relationships? Do you feel there's still room for improvement? Both the commander and the sergeant said the relationship between the community and the law enforcement is very positive. Do you feel there's any room for improvement?
Pastor, I believe there's always room for improvement. I mean, you don't get a good thing and it just stays good. You have to work on it. And I think that's where we're trying to find time to not only take calls for service, but do community events, be present in the community. This past week or so, we did a business coalition meeting at Uptown, and we're trying to help them with the trend in crime they have there. So there's always work to do.
Okay.
And I don't think it ever stops.
Always room for improvement.
Yes, sir.
Good. Officer Alvarez, thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me.
I like that smile you have on. You guys came in full of energy and excited to be here tonight. I'm glad that you're here. When we observe cases like those that have received national attention that I mentioned earlier, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Rodney King, George Floyd, are they more the result of how policing works in America? Or do you feel it had more to do with the ongoing struggle around race in this country?
Pastor, in my honest opinion, I think that cases like that are the actions of the few bad officers that we have in this profession. I have the honor of working with tremendous men and women here at this police department, and I believe that with our training and the focus on holding each other accountable, something to that magnitude will not happen. And it's the actions of the few individuals that ultimately gives this profession a black eye. I can say that in my experience, my 5 years on the job, I have not had an instance where it's gotten to that point where someone was seriously injured or killed as a result of direct law enforcement action. But I can say that there have been teachable moments where we've been pulled aside, we've been told, hey, this is how we could do something better.
Okay.
Focus on that.
Okay.
Just to round about my answer, I think that law enforcement as a whole is doing a tremendous job with the profession itself. And like I said, it's the few bad actions and choices of individuals that ultimately taint the profession.
Okay. Thank you for your honesty. In the 5 years that you've been on the department, you've never witnessed, am I correct? This is a tough question to ask, but I want to ask it. If you happen to witness an officer using unwarranted use of force, police brutality, would you be willing to cross the blue line and report that officer?
Absolutely. Part of department standard operating procedure is we have a duty to intervene to stop that action. And we also have a duty to report it. And it comes down to having that moral compass to realize that someone's in the wrong and to stop it before someone else gets seriously hurt.
Okay. Commander, would you like to Sergeant, go ahead.
I would actually like to add to that. So you're right, it is in the SOP. We do have a duty as per our SOP that says we need to turn somebody in if we see that. But beyond that, I believe that most of the officers in the Albuquerque Police Department, because our integrity is high, we would actually physically intervene. If I saw an officer using undue force, I would physically intervene in that and protect that person from that officer. And then not just, but because of my rank, I would relieve that officer. He would be gone. He would leave that day, probably go home, and then this would obviously go to the commander. And whatever happens beyond that, happens beyond that. But that day, that would have to stop right then. And I couldn't in good conscience allow that officer to continue the rest of the day.
In the police academy, am I correct in saying that all officers and cadets receive training in culture, diversity, and racial awareness?
Yes.
In many cases, African Americans are being killed on the streets of America as it's an open safari hunt. And officers are granted immunity from protection, as I mentioned earlier, because they state that they feared for their life. Commander, once an officer is under your command, do they receive any additional training?
So you brought up a couple of issues, and I would actually go back to your last question before I answer
sure.
this one, which is that, I'm very proud of the people that I'm given the privilege to lead and that they allow me to lead them. Unfortunately, there have been times that I've had to find their actions out of our policy, and I'm talking specifically uses of force. One of my jobs as an area commander is to review all of their uses of force that we investigate in the field. And it doesn't make me proud to do it. It doesn't make me feel good, but I have a duty to the public and I have a duty to the Constitution to make sure that it's being upheld. And so one of the unfortunate things that I've had to do in my job, and it's been more than once, I've had to look at a case that's in front of me and I've had to say, sorry, that was not okay. It was out of policy. And I've had to refer that officer to the misconduct process and to retraining. I don't take pleasure in it, but it's something that we have to do to make sure that the next time that they're on the street, that they understand that what they did isn't going to fly, at least not under the circumstances they did it. So I put that out there because I think the public needs to know that supervisors from the sergeant level and from the officer level, other peer officers, we do hold our other peers to a standard. We do expect quality work out of them. And, any narrative to the opposite, at least on this police department, is in my view, not what I have experienced. In terms of cases that, and I'm sorry, I went back to that question. What was your current question? Because I knew they were related, but now I'm forgetting.
My question was, what additional training are they offered?
Oh, so we have, our police department has a reality-based training center, and we have our academy staffs that training center, and officers every year go through real scenarios that are basically derived from use of force data that we have. So we comb our own internal affairs data, we comb our own use of force data, and we come up with, or I should say they, because I don't get to participate, but they come up with scenarios that we've actually dealt with. And so officers get that experience. Every year they get a chance to, do a live training scenario or multiple live training scenarios. And that is something that I take advantage of, is if I see something that is, most cases are not catastrophic. They're not somebody standing over a handcuffed individual, kicking them in the head over and over again. That's the idea that you get when you talk about excessive force, but that is not the norm. But there are cases where we see people that didn't de-escalate or could have approached something differently, and we refer them for training. And I think it's a useful exercise. And I've never really dealt with an officer who didn't get excited at doing more training. Most officers like to do training.
Would any other officers like to address the training that you have received with culture diversity and cultural awareness? I'm sure that you all have received some basic.
We did, from what I recall, pastors, most of that was just during the general basic police training academy. When it comes to any kind of specialized training after that, it's usually focused on crisis intervention, use of force, the other specialized tools that we carry. I think that could be something that the department might offer officers later on, is additional training in cultural diversity.
Yes, sir.
So when you're asking about diversity training, I think that and what the officer is saying is right. So we get a lot of training on crisis intervention. As a matter of fact, when I was in the academy many years ago, one of the instructors got up and started teaching about crisis intervention, and he started talking about CIT, a new program that APD was putting into use, putting it out there. And I remember taking CIT, right? Learning about how you de-escalate a situation, how you talk to somebody when they're in the middle of a crisis. And I remember that, and I remember it vividly. I remember the scenarios that I went through in that situation. And then a few years later, I hear the DOJ tell me that I've never been through CIT training and that I'm wrong. And then everything I've done has been wrong since the academy. And I don't understand, because I've taken CIT in the academy, and then I went to CIT course. I went to crisis negotiation course, went to crisis negotiation level 2. And I learned the same things in all these courses, but then I'm told that I'm wrong. So what the CASA, or the original findings from the Department of Justice, was that they didn't really find much of a race issue in the city of Albuquerque when it came to use of force. But more of, they said that the issue that they were finding was for a mental health issue. So I think that the department has really pushed the CIT and the mental health issues. And I think that I would say that most of the officers, from your P2Cs, patrolmen second class coming right out of the academy, to individuals 20 years plus, have received a bunch of training on CIT because that was the perceived problem. But now that we're seeing that, race relations are creating a distance between police departments and community members across the United States, I think that departments can focus a little bit differently with that, especially since what we do really have in the city is we still do have a crisis with mental health here in Albuquerque.
Since you've received that basic training to help you understand the difference between culture, yet we often hear of inequities and injustice treatment of not only African Americans, but people in general. It also has been reported, as you mentioned, the DOJ, that the Albuquerque Police Department has a history, a cycle of using excessive force more often than warranted, which is why we are in the situation that we're in. Many times it's unreported, and in most cases, officers are not even disciplined for their conduct. What are some of the measures taken to reduce or eliminate this issue, as well as holding officers accountable? Sergeant, would you like to answer that first for me?
Sure. So again, it goes back to training. So when I first became a sergeant, obviously I didn't know what I was doing as a sergeant. You never know. You learn more by doing the job and by speaking to senior sergeants, by speaking to lieutenants, and that mentorship. You learn from the guys above you and the guys and gals that have done it before you. So one of the things that I did know very well is I knew tactics. So when I got my first squad, I'm like, hey, you guys are juniors. It's 2 a.m. We got nothing else to do because there's no calls holding right now. We'd find an empty house, and I teach them how to clear a house properly. I teach them how to stand in front of a door properly so they don't get killed. And then, my officers were like, hey, this is cool, but How many times can you open up a door? How many times can you go through a door? How many times can you clear a house and not be a specialized unit? So what I also started doing was I would tell my officers, hey, we're going to do training on Monday when we come in. Our Monday, anyway, because it was actually a Friday. But on our Monday, when we come in on Friday night, we're going to do training. But that training is going to be on this SOP. You know, officers like, it's boring. Is it? Wait till I start grilling you on this thing, because this is what's going to get you later on. And they started to see the value of that. You know, they started to see the value. It's not just about the academy. It's not just about MOE. It's about what can you learn even as a small team. You know, I had 6 guys working for me, and the 7 of us would learn together through the dialogue and communication that we're doing now. How do you feel that this SOP affects our department? How do you feel that this SOP, no matter what it is, you know, how do you feel that, you know, the department says you have to do this when you pull somebody over? Why do you think that's there? And this dialogue, this interest in policing and making ourselves a professional police officer and professional police department increases the Albuquerque Police Department in every single way.
It's great that you would take the initiative to continue to give on-the-job training to your officers out in the field. It's a great job, great job. Someone said that the Albuquerque Police Department does not tolerate, and I think you all are saying that tonight, that we do not tolerate unwarranted use of force or police brutality.
Right.
When an officer is held accountable, who would like to answer what actions are taken to hold that officer accountable? Say, for instance, an officer, he continues to demonstrate this misconduct. I was in the police department 30 years ago, and I remember in training, when it came to cultural diversity, some officers' mind was already made up. Even though they went through the training, they did the necessary things in the training to pass that particular area, but they really wasn't serious about it. The compassion for one another. So if an officer continues to use this misconduct, demonstrate that misconduct, what actions are taken to hold him accountable? Commander, I think you mentioned it a minute ago. If he has a history of unnecessary use of force, what forms of discipline are taken against that individual?
So it's a good question, and it's one that the public has a lot, is, you know, how do you determine what kind of discipline an officer is going to receive? All of our policies we list what we call sanctions or classifications next to those policies, and they vary from a sanction 1, which is the highest level, to a 7, which is considered a very minor level. And so what happens is, and it really is dependent on the policy itself, but showing up to work on time is going to be a 7. In other words, if an officer was late and the supervisor wrote them up for that as misconduct, it's a low-level violation. We're not going to terminate somebody for being 10 minutes late to briefing. I mean, you would hope, unless it became such a problem that you escalated it to that level. Other policies obviously have higher classifications depending on what they are. So search and seizure related stuff, which use of force falls under search and seizure, those classifications are higher. And so it really depends on the policy itself that they violate. It depends on what we call aggravating or mitigating factors, which means that the supervisory chain of command looks at the incident, looks at the officer's response to the incident and says, yes, it's an example might be a crash. Yes, you were involved in a crash. We would normally give you a written reprimand for that, but the way you were driving was so egregious, we actually feel like it's much higher than that. We feel like we need to suspend you. Or maybe it's such a minor little tap on the bumper and the officer was responding to an emergency call at the same time and trying to deal with all the multitasking that officers have to do. Unfortunately, I might look at it and say, in this case, I still have to ding you for it because it's wrong. But, you know, I'm not going to hammer you too hard because I see a mitigating factor. So that is factored in. And then the final thing that we look at is someone's history, obviously. And so, and that's really to the meat of your question, is if someone had a history of problems, then, and what we call like offenses, then we would escalate up that level of discipline, as most organizations do. And, you give people increasing amounts of time off, retraining. You might put them on a plan where they have enhanced supervision to ensure that you are monitoring them. And then ultimately you may have to terminate that person. And so really that's a very general overview of discipline. I think, if you don't mind, I think what might be more interesting is, I don't know how the officers, since I haven't worked at their level for a while, I don't know how they perceive the discipline they're receiving, that might be worth exploring.
You have a question for the officers. Officer Punto, how long have you been on the department?
I've been here 2 years.
2 years.
Yes, sir.
What do you think about the process of discipline with the Albuquerque Police Department? Is it fair, just?
So it's definitely time consuming, but I think it's working. It holds us accountable as far as not violating, because not only are we risking getting ourselves in trouble, but anyone involved in our call. And we work very closely with our coworkers, and you don't want to risk getting them in trouble, not letting them come feed their family because you're ignorant to something that you have control over. So
It's been brought to the attention across the country that a lot of officers that are being held accountable for some misconduct are given a holiday instead of discipline. By that I mean that an officer is suspended for a week with pay. That's a holiday and not a discipline. How do you feel about an officer receiving pay while being disciplined, supposedly being disciplined at the same time?
Yeah, I'd love to answer that. So I know what you're talking about. So you're saying on-duty suspension or suspension with pay, you get to stay home for a week, but
You're getting paid.
most of that though, when you're asking this question, the people that are receiving this pay while they're being suspended, this is prior to them being found guilty of whatever they did. So if we have an officer and he shows some sort of misconduct and we think it's egregious, we're gonna say, you know what, you're still gonna get paid. We haven't said you're guilty. We haven't done the investigation. We haven't brought a council together to figure out what to do with what you've done.
Okay.
You're still gonna get paid. So, but we don't want you, out here doing the job because we've seen a pattern of misconduct. So you're gonna stay home, or you're gonna go into one of the substations and you'll be disarmed. You won't have a badge. You won't have any sworn capabilities, but you're still gonna get paid. Your family's still gonna eat.
Okay.
But on the back end of the discipline, that's where I think that you're confusing the discipline with that administrative action. So administrative action is, you're gonna stay home, you're gonna get paid. We're not gonna have you as an officer. We're gonna look at the case. Oh, look, this is egregious. This is horrible. Why is this guy even on the department? He's fired.
Okay.
And
Thanks for the clarity. Because many people have that question. When we hear of police officers being suspended and they suspended with pay. And so that clarifies it for us. I appreciate that. We have a question that came in from the chat box. It says, do any of the officers understand the historical systemic perspective between police and the African-American community? Anyone like to address that? Do any of the officers understand the historic systemic perspective between police and the African-American community?
Well, so my wife is, she's finished her coursework for her PhD. A lot of the really neat books that she's gotten to read, because she's a teacher, and it doesn't seem like it does, but teaching and policing really really coincide, they coexist. And I've read a lot of what she's read. And talking about systemic racism and systemic issues, when you look at it in totality or holistically, it's not just about that policing itself is demonized by different races, but more of governmental control is demonized. So when you have, let's say, redlining, if anybody doesn't know what redlining was in the 40s when soldiers came back from World War II. They had GI Bills, white soldiers, black soldiers, they had money. And they were able to spend that money. They were able to buy homes. But the banks, what they decided to do is they said, we're going to let everybody buy the homes wherever they want. But whenever blacks, Hispanics, or Asians come in, they can live in that little area right there. And we're going to put a little red line around it. That's where you can buy your home. If you try to buy your home anywhere else, you'll get a 75% interest rate. But if you buy your home in this area, you'll get a 10% interest rate, right? That was a systemic problem. That was a banking issue. But by having that, the people that lived in the red line districts were like, hey, wait a second, this is not fair. Why are we being grouped together? But the people that they were coming in contact with, the people that were coming in daily situations were the police. So I am the face of the mayor to the person that's at their home and needs help. When I come in, Mayor Keller's not going to show up, right? He's not going to go to everybody's house. That's why we're employed. We're here to help the citizens of this great city. We're here to help the people. And this is what they see. They see this badge and they probably sort of see my face. When I leave there, they're not going to be able to draw a picture of what I look like, but I bet you they can say he had that badge on. He was wearing those patches and he had sergeant stripes. They probably won't remember my name. So systemically, the issue of, yes, there is a divide between police and different races is because more than likely, it's an overall systemic problem, banking issues, governmental issues, state, city, county, even federal. And we are the face for that. And I think that people should actually take a step back and say, you know what, this guy, this person standing in front of me today, the one who I said, you always take me to jail when I've never met you once in my life. You know, I'm not that person. I'm somebody completely different. But they don't. They see me as an entity that wears the badge and represents the city of Albuquerque.
Anyone else? Officer Alvarez? In reading the mission statement, it states that the mission is to preserve the peace, protect our community through community-oriented policing. And it says it must be done with fairness, pride, integrity, and respect. Can you tell us, you've been on the department now for 5 years. I'm interested in, after knowing that the predicament of police officers, the situations and the accusations of police officers, I'm curious to know why you're interested in continuing to work in this profession.
The short answer is I love my job.
You love your job.
The only way that I could really explain it is in this profession, it's given me a variety of experiences that I don't believe I could have had in any other field. Dealing with the community, and dealing is the wrong word, speaking with the community, meeting with them, whether it's on a call for service or stopping to check in with some of the businesses that we have the coalitions with. It's building the partnerships with our community through community-oriented policing. That's not something that you can get working in a different field. And I enjoy it. I like meeting new people. I like introducing myself. I like letting them know that if they need me, I'm here, call me, and I'll show up. And that's ultimately what brought me to this field.
Do you find it rewarding to be associated with community-oriented policing?
I do, yes. And what I'll say is and this will tie back to the overall positive feel that we get from the community is in these times now where the current climate in the culture or in the country is, you know, law enforcement is trying to rebuild the trust with the community. It's rewarding to me to go to those businesses that I have established relationships with and to be told, hey, thank you for your service. Thanks for coming by. Thank you for coming out to take my report. I wish there was more of you guys around. Yeah, it took you 3 hours to get here, but
Thank you.
thanks for coming. It's very rewarding. And I feel that what I do on the day to day is worth the pain, the struggles, the overtime, the paperwork, so that I'm contributing to the community to better it.
Here's a good question. It came from the chat box. It asks, how do you propose that the community can help the Albuquerque Police Department make changes? Anyone? How can the community help the police department? That's basically what the question is.
I've spoken a lot. I've been waiting just to, I don't want to own the meeting because I'm used to these things. So I think that what we've talked about, and Sergeant Savagia brought it up earlier in his previous answer about, that we are a representative of the government, right? We are the government. That's what people see when they see the badge. And I think that when communities feel like they want something different, whether it's from their police department or other, they feel like there's inequities, that kind of thing. I truly believe that a lot of that has to do with public policy, because we're not legislators, right? I mean, I vote, but I don't make policy. The officers don't make policy. We don't make the laws. And so I think when members of the community, and it's hard in this kind of setting because I can't, when that question comes about, I'd like to know more about what their perception is. What are the changes they want to see from the police department when they say, how can the community help? But from my perspective is, that public policy is determined by the community. It's not so much determined by the police department. And so I think that the community can help us in many ways. One of those ways is through public input, which I think that we've sought out as a police department. I mean, this is new to me. We've gone to community meetings for years. This type of environment is new, and I think it's going to be a positive thing for us.
Take, for example, the Community Policing Council. Would those citizens getting involved in the CPCs of their area, could that be beneficial to the department? Because it is a collaboration in corporately working together with the police department in that area. So would that be a big help by getting involved? They could help. Of
course. And I think too, we mentioned that we're short-staffed. We always talk about being short-staffed. We try to recruit, but we do recruiting from all over, but what we really want are local members of the community, right? The police are the community. There's not a separation. People sometimes perceive there's a separation, but I live here. These officers live here. We have kids here. We are the community as well. We are part of that community. And I think what we want is members of the community, more members of the community to join our ranks. And particularly, I would love if there are members of the community or groups in the community that feel disenfranchised. I would love to see more Black officers. I really would. I would love to see more Asian officers. I would love to see more of those members of the community come to the police department.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think a benefit of the CPC is the education as well. Public has a perception of what we actually do or what we go through, and that'll open their eyes a little bit more. Victor did actually do a ride along with a business owner, and she got to see our everyday struggle And it kind of explains, okay, this is why you haven't come to my call, because you had to deal with all these other calls. And it helps them see just the variety of work we're faced with.
That you're involved in.
Yes,
Just exactly what do you do?
yes,
They would give them a different perspective of the police
Exactly.
and wouldn't see them as an adversary.
I also, sorry to interrupt, I
Go
also
ahead.
think that there's a big part of the community that has no idea about our civilian police academy. So many people are like, wow, like I think only college students go through it because it's part of their the criminal, if they're a criminal justice major. And like my parents did it because I'm part of the police department, so they want to get involved somehow. But it was an eye opener because it's such a great, it's like I think a 12-week program, and I think it's a great again, an opportunity for people to have a better understanding of how our job works. Because again, it's back and forth. It's not just us trying to understand different cultures and be involved that way, but it works both ways. And I think it would be great for when people go through our civilian police academy or on ride-alongs to get just a little bit of a, 8-10 hours of realization of what our job actually is instead of what the media portrays it is.
Okay.
I would have to agree with that. I did a ride along when I was a younger officer, and my commander, or he was a captain, they were called captains at the time, and he says, "Hey, I want you to take this girl on a ride along." I said, "Sure." She gets in the car and we start driving. I could feel a little bit of weird tension with her, but I didn't understand it. By the end of the night, well, we were done. It was a swing shift. By the time I dropped her off back at the substation, she gave me a big hug and was like, "I had no idea." That's all she said, is "I had no idea." And I was like, "Okay, well, now you know, and I didn't think anything of it. And then the next day, my commander was like, "How was your ride along?" And I said, "It was great." And he was like, "She works for one of our newspapers, and she's always talked bad about the police department." And I was like, "Wow, I think maybe I gave her a different perspective."
Good.
And I think and that doesn't come down, you have to do a ride along. You don't have to go through the Citizen Police Academy. What I think it is just a little bit of basic education. I mean, basic education. Looking at the numbers for people to get shot across America. You know what I mean? How many people get shot? How many people are armed? How many aren't armed? What are they doing when they get shot? Look at the officers that get killed. There's a ton of officers that die every year. And I was never aware. I was in the National Guard for 5 years before I became a police officer. And I had no idea how many officers died every year until I joined the police academy, and every day somebody would get put up on the board because it was an officer in another city or another state that was killed. And every day I'm looking at the board like that board's getting full of people. They're not just a badge, they're not just a gun, it's a person. And there's this guy here who's dead, and now his wife and his kids will never have him. And I think just by going on that officer down page, people are like, "I don't want to see that." Good, I'm glad they're dead. Really? How can you say that about another person? I don't care if you're black or you're white or you're Hispanic or you're Asian. Somebody who dies needlessly, it's sad. It saddens me. I think it's horrible. And you can look at a person and say, look at that guy, he's got gang tattoos. Bad, let him die. Really? Why? How do you know?
He's human.
I belong to a church here in the city, and I was talking to one of the associate pastors at my church. And my associate pastor, the guy, when you look at the dude, you're like, that's a rough dude. But he's one of my associate pastors, and he brings people to the Lord. He brings people back into our community. And not just at our church, but in the community here. He helps the homeless. Week after week after week, he goes out there and he does this little ministry. This guy goes to a church. He sits down, and they're part of a construction crew. He goes and sits down in the church. People looked at him and they were like, "We got to leave." Well, why did they do that? Because of a perception they had about him, right? But if that guy was to die, some people would be like, "He's just a gangbanger." Oh, well.
Yeah.
But I would truly know him, and I would say, no, that was a travesty. Do you see what I'm saying? And so for the people that want to say that all officers should die, okay, we'll go on a ride along. Sit down at the police academy and figure out why we do what we do. And if you don't have that time, or if you just don't want to make that effort, literally open up a website. There's websites that'll show you what we do. They'll explain how we do things. You know, it just takes a little bit of the community to make an effort to see what police officers actually do and what we actually are.
So what are you saying, Sergeant Saavedra, are you saying that public support is very important for the legitimacy of the police as well as the ability to, for the police to fight crime effectively?
It's the pinnacle. Without public support, we don't exist. If as a police department, if we want to go to the public and I say you broke the law of speeding, who set that law? I didn't. The public set the law. Now, does that mean every single person voted for that speed limit? No. But what they did is we've come together as a whole, as a community, and said, if you drive 75 miles an hour through a neighborhood, you're probably going to run over a child. We need to have some sort of limit. And we've done that. Community-wide, we've done that. I mean, that's just the basic thing, right? Speeding. And by saying that we want these limits, we have done that as a community. There wasn't one person, right? And so I think if you look at in totality, if we don't have community support, then we don't exist as a police department, period. Because if the community can't stand what we do, the community could vote us out. The community could get rid of us, right? But then this is something that, a question that the commander had answered earlier, and I wanted to say something, but I just didn't know how to at the time. But when you talked about Michael Brown and Ferguson, right? So Ferguson they obviously didn't have community support behind their policing. And it wasn't all of the community. You can never say all, right?
No.
You can't go hyperbole, but when you look at it and you say a lot of the community or a loud portion of the community did not support the police department. So the police department and the mayor, they said, okay, they backed out. They stopped policing in Ferguson for 1 week. Not because it was a week determined, it was just they did. But the outcry from the citizens was like, whoa, hold on. Crime's gone crazy. We don't have police officers. What are we doing here? That little 1 week is exactly what happens when you defund and you don't support your police officers. Now, does that mean that they wanted them back just as bad as they were or doing the bad things that they were doing? No, they wanted them back because they needed that help. The community needs police officers. Police officers need the community. We're symbiotic. Without each other, we don't exist.
And to give you a different perspective on that is, so every week, we do a review of our shootings here in Albuquerque. We meet with the district attorney's office. We meet with all of our division heads. We look at all of our shootings, and the question's always asked, what's the next step? How do we stop this? How do we reduce shootings in Albuquerque, right? One of the themes that comes out over and over again is so-and-so who's a victim won't talk to us. And so when you talk about legitimacy and having that public support, we can't, if there's a segment of the community, because I believe that all individuals matter, that all lives matter, and that we should never, ever have the attitude that, as you said, oh, well, so-and-so died. He was a criminal. He's a drug user. He's a gangbanger. Does it really matter? Yes, it does matter. And if we don't have the support of the local community, we can't get the information that we need to actually get justice for that family. And then that family feels disenfranchised and not served by the police. So it's a horrible cycle. So I think that, yes, we need the public to do our jobs.
The fact that there are so many cameras in so many places, and that many other things that people said were going on are now being documented on film, how hopeful are you about the chances that we can address the problem of discriminatory policing? Or do you even think that it even exists? How about you, Officer Freeland?
Can you reword your question?
How hopeful are you about the chances that we can address the problem of discriminatory policing now that we have all these cameras in so many places, things that many people said were going on, now being documented on film? How how hopeful are you that this will improve the chances that we can address the problem of discriminatory policing?
Well, I'm very hopeful. And I think that it's already happening. I mean, our department has had OBRDs for quite some time, or on-body recording devices, if that's what you're talking about. So I think it's, at first, I know there was a lot of pushback. I was a police service aide when they first came out with these tiny little cameras, and it was kind of a pushback at the police department, thinking, oh, you're questioning who I am and what I do, and that what I said happened didn't happen. But the thing is that these cameras show, obviously, are extremely transparent. They don't show everything, because I think that now with these cameras and how they're reviewed, you get one angle. You don't get a perception of who that officer that was there in the whole situation, but it extremely helps either bunk or debunk what was said that happened on either side of either party. So, and I think they're extremely helpful, because I do my job with integrity. I'm not here to use excessive force on a certain race, gender, or class. I'm here to do my job and do it with integrity. And this camera is going to show exactly that happened. So I'm extremely hopeful that it shows. But at the same time, I think back to what Sergeant Saavedra said, is that there are some people who don't want to see the truth. They don't want to go on the Officer Memorial Down page. They don't want to see the reality, I think, and that's just what it is. But I think these cameras are extremely helpful on both sides of the field, when an officer is doing something in good faith, and when there's a random officer, the few and far between that are acting poorly.
Okay. As we continue to discuss racial profiling, this question, any one of you can answer it. I'll ask Officer Puncho. I understand this is a big question, but what do you think it would take to end systemic racism that exists? I'm not saying amongst the Albuquerque Police Department, but police departments in general. What do you think it would take to end systemic racism among the rank and file of police departments across the country, including Albuquerque?
I think just transparency from both ends. I mean, there's always going to be a lot of moving parts, but we just have to be able to work together and trust each other.
Okay. Would you all agree that even in the Albuquerque Police Department, there may be some systemic racism that may be hidden? Some may be just, some officers just blatant. They don't mind you knowing. My question here is, since systemic racism, also known as institutional racism, is a form of racism embedded through laws within the society, the main problem nowadays is not folks with hoods, but it's folks dressed in suits and in uniforms. The question is, do you agree that it does exist in our society? Anyone? Yes.
I would say it did. There was a time when systemic racism was so blatant, it wasn't even funny. I mean, when you look at the civil rights movement, when you look at when the African Americans were trying to vote down south, you would walk in, if you're a white guy, you wanted to vote, you just put your card in, you voted your vote. But if you were black, you had to take a test. Why didn't everybody have to take a test? Systemic racism, right? That's exactly what you're speaking about. They put a law on the books that if you were black and you wanted to vote, you had to take a test.
You mentioned redlining.
Redlining, exactly. I mean, these are systemic problems. But if you look in our history of the United States, yes, we've done things that are a little embarrassing, but instead of hiding them, we should learn about them and why we should never do them again.
And that's why we're here tonight, to learn about them, talk about them, so that we can make a difference and hopefully prevent it. Evidence demonstrate that systemic racism exists and persists in our schools, our offices, court systems, elsewhere. And we have to be clear that systemic racism is corrosive in a widespread problem in our society. And that's why the chief has commanded that we come together with these officers and discuss these issues that are surely prevailing in our society today. We're grateful that here in New Mexico, that we haven't had to address the issues and the problems that other parts of the country are faced with. But we also have to understand that it exists and it's right here among us. And so we have to understand so that we can clear up this issue so that we can prevent it from coming and being a problem in New Mexico. I am a native New Mexican. I've experienced the redlining that he mentioned. I remember when I was growing up in Hobbs, New Mexico, there was only certain parts of the cities that we could live in. I remember my parents trying to buy a city out on Broadmoor, but we couldn't live in that area because of the color of our skin. I remember moving to Albuquerque 21 years ago. I've experienced racial profiling here in Albuquerque. Don't know the officer. Luckily, I wasn't killed or anything, but I was pulled over just because I was driving while black. So it does exist, and the chief understands. And so that we can build trust in the Albuquerque Police Department in the community. The chief of police have asked us to come together on meetings such as this so that we can discuss those issues, bring it to the table so that we can prevent it and hopefully end it here in New Mexico. So as we come to a conclusion tonight, I want to thank Commander Weber, Officer Saavedra, Officer Freeland, Officer Alvarez, and Officer Pancho for being with us. I want to thank each of you for joining us on our Zoom account tonight as we try to work together to end this problem. The failure to act to end systemic racism hurts those who are victimized, and it denies all of us the opportunity to benefit from the gift of diversity. As Americans, we must remember that if we want to be a part of the solution to fix racism, fix inequality, that we are all called to examine our own hearts and our own consciences for how we might contribute to or break down racial divisions, intolerances, and discriminations. We may not all embrace the full agenda of the Black Lives Movement, but I hope what you've heard tonight will open a door for further dialogue on the issues of race and policing. Good night, and thank you all for joining us. Ask that you please join us on Thursday night, May the 20th, here at 5 o'clock for the Valley Area Command, and the facilitator will be Dr. Harold Bailey. Again, thank you for joining us, and good night.